Well, devout agnostic, my pal, my Washington State pal, sent me a video by Asmundor in which he talks about how all these major corporations don't have any gay rights, don't have any rainbow flags or anything like that on their sites, even though it's Pride Month and it coincides with my observations at my local shopping mall in the video that I recorded yesterday. So it would seem that there has been a definite effort to mute this whole Pride Month thing, to not stick it in our faces like they did in fairly recent years. Now, for me, while I was recording the video in the mall yesterday, I talked about a video that I'd made the year before during Pride Month. It turned out that video was actually 2 years before. It was in summer. It was in June of 2023 when I went around the mall, and even then, there was a conspicuous absence of virtue signaling, emblems, rainbow flags, what have you. But yesterday there was even less of it than there had been 2 years ago. The question might arise: why? Why are they doing this? Is it because this is the end of woke? I don't think it's the end of woke, but I also don't think it's insignificant. There are people who just go too far and say, "Oh well, this woke is over," and it's all because of Trump. Trump's getting elected is what killed it. No, I don't think that's the case at all. But there's also people who just who just are determined. There are people who just are determined. Especially on the right. Maybe it's all over the political spectrum, and I just notice it more on the right because I am on the right myself, and it affects me more. But there's so many people who just want to be demoralized and want to think things are just as bad as they ever were, and that they'll never change. The black pilled stuff, and so they're saying, oh well, it's still just the same as it was. They're just it's just a tactical thing that they're withdrawing from it, but that doesn't mean that they're still as rabid as ever. And it admittedly, what I showed in my video, it might not be the same all across the Western world. There may be countries in the West where they're still gung ho. They're still in your face with it all. But it seems to definitely have been in decline. It seems to definitely be in decline here in the United States, and that the fact that the United States is the leader of the Western world, whether you like it or not, it is. And I'm not. I am not a fan of my country's foreign policy or of most of our so-called leaders. So, I separate the government from the people, and in that sense, I could see myself entertaining patriotic thoughts because there's lots that's great about the people of America. But the leadership of America is not great, and the president we have now is better than the president we might have had, or the president that we used to have. But all in all, the ruling class of America is evil and corrupt, and so forth. So a good question is why? Why are they doing this? Why? Why are they making it so much less visible? Because it seems like they are. Um, well, around 10 years ago, I remember when this whole weird period really kicked off was 2015. It was when things started to get unstable. Um, it was uh, when they started getting really aggressive with the woke stuff. It wasn't really called woke yet. It was called SJW at the time. But woke and SJW and political correctness are three terms for the same phenomenon. But I remember, I've said this before, but I remember standing in line at a bookstore, and the one of the magazines that was on display said the transgender child, and I had a picture of a child who I guess we were supposed to conclude was transgender, and I thought to myself, man, they're really going aggressively into this realm here. You know, they're uh, they're making it about children. Um, that's aggressive. You know, you would think that they would want to, with their propaganda, you'd think that they would want to, go after or first convince people in ways that aren't as controversial, that don't elicit as much of a strong emotional reaction as people coming after children. Trying to get children to take hormone pills to change their gender, or even to mutilate them in so-called gender affirming surgery to change their gender. But they were going right there. They went right there. They went there. Um, and that made me think, yeah, this is things are changing. Think this is things are getting weird. And that was 2015. 2016, of course, had Brexit, had the election of Trump, and all the crazy stuff that happened afterwards, and all of the the transformation of our nation into a war zone, more or less. Not a physical war zone mostly, although it became that way in certain places. Um, but ideologically, it became this thing where, as I've said before, it was just too exhausting to pay any attention to the news. I made a conscious decision not to listen to talk radio anymore, not to uh, not to follow, not to look at newspaper headlines, because there was so much mendacity. There was uh, such a overreaction. It seemed particularly to Trump's election, that, and then the way that the what was then called the alt right, which I was putatively a part of, the way that they were treated, the way that they were talked about. At first, when alt right became a term that was uh, that broke into the mainstream, at first I thought, this is really interesting. This is really uh, I felt a little I felt proud to be a part of this movement that had now broken from obscurity into the mainstream. Um, it was exciting. But after a while, there was just so much mendacity about the way the so-called alt-right was covered, and how alt-right became a slur. It became a slur in the same way that incel would become a slur shortly thereafter. Um, to the point where I didn't even want to, there were days early on where I would actually get on the internet, type alt-right into a search engine, just because it was so interesting and frankly so thrilling to see something that I had been a part of. I had written for a site called Alternative Right, and I had identified myself as alt-right, even though I had my differences in some ways with uh, what what it seemed like the alt-right was to a lot of people. But I was still, I still associated myself with that faction, if you will. Um, you know, uh, but but eventually it was just that every story I was seeing was just a hideous lie, and there was no the liars weren't getting called out. They weren't getting called on the carpet. They weren't. There was no mitigating force. It was just total. There'd been an unleashing of vitriol that was that was startling, and that was frightening. And people were swept up in its spell. You know, and it only, in some ways it only got worse. I mean, especially in 2020, it got way worse. Um, and I think putting a particular emphasis on things like Pride Month, and having the transgender child be on the cover of a major magazine that's on display, prominently on display near the checkout line. Not some article that's buried in some, you know, far left academic journal that's that you'd never see in a bookstore, that you'd have to go to a college campus to find something like that. But now it had been mainstreamed, and not mainstreamed in a way. I don't think it was because there was suddenly, this acceptance of the idea that children aren't necessarily the sex they were born with, and that it's okay to give children hormone blockers and mutilating surgery, because your son is acting kind of effeminate, or your daughter's a tomboy. Um, you know, and your son sits down when he pees. Actually, just this. I mean, I'm laughing, but it's actually not funny. It's horrific. It's just. I mean, it's funny in a way, if you can, you know, if you can take the horror out of it. Anyway, um, all this is to say, it seems like we're moving into a new phase now. Uh, Maybe, it seems like the 10, and I don't think this has much. I don't think this has much to do with Trump winning the election. Trump won the election in 2016. Remember, and that certainly didn't stop uh, this stop leftists from going absolutely berserk. And I'm talking, when I say leftists, I mean mainstream media types. really neoliberals, more than leftists. Just the neoliberal types who make up the 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 institutions that are composed of the in the mainstream media, or other, or the you know the the universities, or other places, um, places of power and influence within the culture. I don't see why Trump winning in 2024 would would have that kind of effect. Would convince the elites to say, okay, we need to cool it now, when it did the very opposite to them in 2016. It threw more, it threw gasoline on the fire. If their candidate had won in 2016, if Hillary Clinton had won as everybody was expecting, then they would have been a lot more mellow. They would have been a ton more mellow afterwards. But Trump winning brought out the demon in them, and in so many others. And I think, the hostility is real. It was real, and it is real. And it's not really about Trump per se. But again, I noticed with the Pride, the stuff for for Pride Month. I noted that it was being muted in 2023, when Joe Biden was president, when it didn't look like there was going to be a resurgence of Trump. But they were still going very much in this direction. They were muting this, the in your faceness of all this stuff that they had really aggressively pushed for so long. So, I don't believe that that the powers that be, the powers that shouldn't be, I don't believe they just control everything, and that nothing happens without them signing off on it, because there are always countervailing forces. Things are always in flux, and there is such a thing as good. There is the power of good. So evil cannot, evil prevails at times, but not at all times. So I do, but that said, I do think there is something strategic. I would agree that there's something strategic about the the muting of all the gay stuff. Um, I think it's a deliberate choice. We see how coordinated it is. We see how all the corporations who went ultra mega woke, all at around the same time, they're just about all now refraining from that, from doing so. Uh, does this mean we should trust them now? No, of course not. Does this mean that they mean us well? No, of course not. I'm just suggesting that it's not just a cosmetic change. There's something real about this change. Um, I'm not saying that in a deeper sense, the leopard doesn't change its spots, right? So that we're still up against the same evil powers, principalities, thrones, and dominions that we always were up against. But I think we're moving into a different phase of it now, where they don't want to they don't want to be in our face as much. Um, and that, I think that is significant. But so I'm taking the middle road. I'm not among those who say, oh, there's nothing that's not meaningful at all. It means nothing. Uh, Everything's the same as it ever was. But I'm also not saying, oh, this means that uh, they've declared defeat and they're in retreat. It's not a retreat. It's moving into a new phase, is what I think it is. Now, what that new phase is, I don't know. I don't. It's interesting to speculate, but I don't know. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Leave me a comment below if you have any yourself.